On my second visit to the Philippines, I met this really lovely gal. She's 23. I'm 35, and there was this instant connection between us. I'm an American, by the way. She was this perfect traditional girl, cooking, cleaning, doing everything that you wouldn't normally expect from a Western woman, and she absolutely adored me. Over 3 years, I took numerous trips to the Philippines. I genuinely thought I'd found my future wife. She came from a solid family, not well off, living in a rural area on a dirt road, 10 kilometers out in the countryside. They're not religious, just good, down-to-earth people. I'd always dreamt of marrying a traditional woman. I feel that feminism and Western culture make it really hard to find a loyal, decent wife here in the States. That's why I'm drawn to Filipino women. I tied the knot with my wife 3 years after meeting her. There weren't any red flags. She had just finished her nursing degree in the Philippines, and I covered most of her tuition costs during her 3 years at nursing school. Once she comes to the States, she'll be making good money. I work at the DMV, so I'm not exactly raking it in. Even though she'll earn more than me when she gets to the States while she was in the Philippines, I paid for her apartment, helped out her family financially, and footed the bill for our wedding. When I got back to the U.S., I applied for a spousal visa for my wife while she was still in the Philippines. After her interview at the U.S. Embassy in her home country, they issued her an immigrant visa that was good for a year. Once she landed in the U.S., we spent 4 years bouncing back and forth with USCIS to secure her 10-year green card. That whole process was super complicated, time-consuming, and definitely not cheap. During those 4 years, she took her nursing exam, passed it, and we had a little girl. Since she was earning way more than me, I decided to be the stay-at-home dad for our daughter. I did some part-time work and a few side gigs, but she was the one bringing home the bacon. In those 4 years, she was an amazing wife. I didn't see any warning signs. We didn't have any major marital problems during her visa process, but I did start to notice that she was getting pretty into the American lifestyle. It didn't become super obvious until she got her 10-year green card. She knew that once she got that card, the only way I could send her back to her home country was if she committed a serious crime. Once she had her green card, it felt like she just checked out of our marriage. She was totally loving her new life, the independence and the freedom. It didn't feel like we were growing apart. It felt like we were pushed apart. She became distant, occasionally a bit harsh, and always seemed to find a reason to be out of the house. The isolation from the pandemic didn't help. I know she looks at life in the U.S. and thinks this is so dull. We don't go anywhere or see anyone. It's a terrible place to live. She doesn't realize that the pandemic lockdown would be way worse in her home country. About 6 months ago, I noticed a shift. She started telling little white lies and going out with coworkers after hours. Suddenly her phone, her paycheck, her bank account, everything was off limits to me. I tried talking to her. I asked her if she wanted something different or if we needed to shake things up. I even went to marriage counseling with her, although she wasn't too thrilled about it. But it was clear she wasn't committed to anything other than finding her own happiness. I asked the counselor to spend more time with me, but for some reason, she blew me off. That's a separate issue I'll deal with later. She stopped wearing her wedding ring half a year ago. I gave her a list of things I expected from her, like wearing her ring, not driving drunk, and letting me know where she was going, but she totally ignored it. That's when I realized if I caught her lying again, it would be the final straw. I told her I knew she was keeping secrets and she needed to come clean. I called her out on some of the lies, but she just denied everything and basically shut down. The lies kept getting bigger and more frequent, but she still managed to deny them. Until last month when she got tangled up in her own web of lies. I pushed her for the truth, and after an hour, she finally admitted it. She had a secret Tinder account, and she'd been seeing a bunch of guys she met on there. I've had a pretty good idea of what she was up to. She'd call out sick from work but still drive to the office park and then hop in an Uber to go see her side guys. She did this multiple times. She'd text me saying she was at a work party, but she'd really be at some Tinder guy's place all night. She'd text me saying she was too drunk to drive and was going to crash there. On her days off, she'd say she was going shopping, but was actually sneaking off to some guy's apartment. This happened a bunch of times. She'd even meet up with these guys in her work parking lot. The problem is I didn't figure all this out until it was too late. When I cornered her for the truth last month, she only spilled about 10% of it. Her response was, I've told you enough, and she's still lying about these things. I mean, she's not just a cheater. She's a full-blown liar. I know for a fact she's met up with her Tinder flings at least 23 times with at least 11 different guys, but she only admits to seeing 4 of them. It took about 2 weeks for all this to come out. And with each passing day, my pain, stress, sadness, and anger just kept growing. It's been 6 weeks since she fessed up, and I'm still only sleeping about 3 hours a night. I've got a pretty good handle on what she was up to. Our little girl is absolutely lovely and so full of joy. She's at that age where she turns everything into a fun game or a wild adventure. She really should have both parents there to keep up with her, guide her growth, and share in the joy of her childhood. But her mom has been missing in action for at least 6 days a week, putting her own desires above everything else. Our girl is really starting to feel the effects. Every day she asks, "Where's mommy? I want to play with her. Is mommy going to tuck me in tonight?" And she's starting to act out, desperate for attention. It's totally unacceptable that my wife is squandering these precious years of our daughter's life. She's done irreversible harm to our family. I'm the one at home all day, every day, looking after our daughter while my wife works and has her secret life. Any free time my wife should have spent with our daughter, she instead spent out and about, fooling around with random guys and seeking her own pleasure while I was at home meeting our toddler's every need. The pandemic had us cooped up in the house for 6 months, with our only outings being neighborhood strolls, and my solo grocery store runs every 10 days to avoid COVID exposure. My daughter is my number one concern. All this time, while I've had a toddler hanging on me, I couldn't keep tabs on my wife's nighttime activities, and I couldn't even consider having an affair myself even if I wanted to. My wife took advantage of the fact that I was tied down at home, so she could have her alone time and mess around. She totally disregarded our daughter's needs, instead focusing on her own desires every chance she got, and she did all of this in the middle of a pandemic. She's a nurse, so she knows the risks. She put our family in danger, including our little girl, sleeping around with different men while health experts are advising us to limit contact with people outside our household. She won't talk about what was going through her head when she was leaving our daughter alone and making choices that put us at a high risk for COVID-19. She clearly doesn't have a motherly bone in her body, showing no regard for our daughter's health and welfare. 3 days after my wife confessed to the basics of her actions, I got in touch with a divorce lawyer. She'll be served the papers within a week, September 2020. My wife has no idea what's coming. In her eyes, I've been a picture-perfect husband for the past 5 weeks. She hasn't shown any guilt, regret, or remorse for wrecking me, our marriage, and our daughter's life. In fact, she probably thinks I'm begging for forgiveness since I've been trying to cater to her every need and pamper her. She's mentioned a few times, "I'm hurting, I'm trying to hold it together," but she's still the same, hiding, lying, and striving for independence. You live and learn, I guess. I feel taken advantage of. She's got her green card. She'll benefit from our marriage. She still has her roster of Tinder flings. Soon, she'll have the absolute freedom she's always wanted, but there's no way in hell I'm letting my daughter be raised by her. Heads up, I've been jotting down everything in a journal since the end of March. It's just a text file, but it's now up to 350 KB, and I've recorded everything. I also keep extra copies just in case. Her green card's good for 10 years, and trust me, I know the ins and outs of this thing. I planned, applied, and finished all the immigration stuff, so we'd be set for a lifetime here in the US. She's not going to lose her green card, which is a bummer unless she commits a serious crime. A U.S. immigrant visa means I promise the U.S. government to pay back the GAVD for any public benefit she gets for basically a decade. I signed that with my eyes wide open. I never thought otherwise, and I'm cool with that. The cash I would have spent on health insurance, beauty products, clothes, and whatnot if we'd stayed married would probably cost more. My lawyer and I have already put together the divorce papers, pointing out my wife's constant absence and her disinterest in our daughter's welfare. We even have written statements from friends and neighbors who've seen me being the round-the-clock parent. So fingers crossed, that should give me a leg up in the custody battle. The draft papers already request the court to rule that I keep our daughter's passports, that my wife can't take her out of the country, and that she needs my approval to get new passports for our daughter. Got that covered. My daughter's my number one concern. And if it comes down to paying hefty spousal support or getting custody of my child, I'll happily make that deal, although my wife doesn't know that. I've glanced over the 180 stuff, not really getting what it's all about unless it's to help patch things up. I'll look over it again, but this time with the goal of distancing myself. I reckon I'm pretty far into the points already, and for the past 5 weeks, I've been playing the perfect husband. But fixing things ain't happening. There's no way I'm going to be the guy whose wife is messing around with a ton of Tinder dudes every month. She's dead set against promising that she'll stop doing it. So there's no point in asking for give me a timeline or write no contact letters. Divorce is happening, and that's that. She might turn ugly when she finds out about the divorce. I'm not sure, but my lawyer and I are getting ready. Her go-to move when I try to talk things out is to shut down, but if she switches it up with crying and begging for another chance, I won't bite. She made her bed. There's no going back now. 2 things I gotta do after reading posts here. Set up a doc appointment for a full checkup, including testing for STDs. We were intimate not often, but during the months she was with other guys, I had no idea, and I need something to help me sleep. I'll grab a voice-activated recorder on my next grocery run. Update. My attorney and I make a good team, and I trust his experience and guidance. But I'm stuck between following my gut and taking his advice. I was all set to spill the beans to my wife's family when she got the divorce papers. Her folks live back in her home country. I filled my lawyer in on my plan, and he was like, no, don't do that. We don't want to look like we're out to get her and mess up any chances of working things out. I get that, but if anyone can knock some sense into my wife, it's her folks. We spent 3 years living in her home country after tying the knot, only about a 10-mile drive from her mom, dad, brother, and sisters. I really dig her family. In fact, they were one of the reasons I chose to marry her. Plus, I think they respect me too. I've been told so many times how much they appreciate me and how well I fit into their world. They're going to be out for blood. I mean, not literally, I hope, when they hear what she's been up to. I've been down this road before when my wife stepped out of line and her family set her straight real fast, leaving her feeling sorry and with a stern warning not to bring shame on the family. That's how it is over there. Family comes first, and I was happy to be a part of that. The divorce papers are going to be delivered next week. My signature is already on them. Just hanging tight for one more statement from a buddy who can vouch for my bond with my daughter. So I got to make up my mind in the next few days. Should I break the news to her family? Or should I wait till the divorce is all done and dusted, probably 4-5 months from now, like my lawyer suggests, so it doesn't throw a wrench in any negotiations? If I hold off on telling them right now, she likely won't spill the beans right away either, though she can't keep it under wraps for too long. When she got busted, she told a few of her buddies I cheated on my husband, and she'll probably stick to that story. But it's a whole lot worse than that. She was on Tinder hooking up with at least a dozen random dudes sneaking off to their places when she was supposed to be working, leaving me to take care of our daughter around the clock when she could have been there for her, and she did all this smack in the middle of a pandemic. Her family deserves to know the whole truth. They're going to be beyond pissed. But for me, the best case scenario would be if she decided to go back to her home country, leaving me and my daughter in peace and allowing me to raise my daughter with real family values. I don't know if she'd be up for that, but I need to have some bargaining chips. My lawyer's got a point. If I blow the whistle on her to her parents right now, she won't have a reason to go back to her home country just to face the music. Update. I can see folks reacting the same way I did when all this stuff came out. I highly doubt my wife fessed up to more than like 10% of the real story. But when she first owned up to meeting one dude from Tinder, I was still in the dark about the rest. I straight up asked if they use protection. Obviously, my mind jumped to STDs first, but there's a ton of other risky behavior involved too. Hello, COVID. She was like, yes. But, seriously, how could I verify that? And it would be super naive to think she had any kind of barrier method going on during BJ. So even if a protection made a brief appearance, I'm not fooling myself. And then I found out about all the other guys. She also claimed she wore a face mask when she first met these guys. She seems to believe this somehow demonstrates how mindful she was about keeping us healthy, including our little girl. Unbelievable. And I know for a fact she's not telling the truth. There's really no point in grilling her on these things. She'd just keep lying, and the reality is already clear as day. She was out doing all this for at least 3 months. Every single free moment outside of work, both scheduled and unscheduled time off, was spent chasing after men. Meanwhile, I was at home with our daughter all day, every day. She should have been here with our little girl. She should have stepped up and been a mom, not absent from our kid's life. Heck, she should have been a wife. Like I said before, she's a nurse. She works in healthcare. She knows better. She should have done everything she could to shield us from the risk of COVID. No, there's zero chance I'm thinking about getting back together. The divorce paperwork is all ready. Just waiting on one more statement from a witness. Someone who can speak to how much I'm there for my daughter. My lawyer tells me we should be all set to serve her the papers next week. As for the whole 180 inches thing, I got all my ducks in a row for this divorce. She doesn't have a clue about what's about to hit her. We haven't touched the big bad issue for over a month because she flat out refuses to have that conversation. Naturally, I wanted to know all the gritty details. How, when, why, who, where. I guess that's the usual response when you find out your wife's been messing around. But she's done nothing but lie, manipulate, shift the blame, and completely shut down. I tried talking to her for a couple days, but she basically said, "Stop asking questions or I'm out of here." I never had reconciliation on the table. I just wanted to understand why she blew up our marriage and set our daughter up for a world of hurt. But for the past month and a half, I haven't brought it up. There's no point. It's over, and she's got to deal with what comes next. We don't chat about that stuff, but we do talk about everyday life. What I'm making for dinner. Yeah, I'm the one keeping the home fires burning while she's out working or whatever. What our daughter got up to today when she's due for her next bath and so on, I've checked out. I'm already looking forward. The divorce papers will, hopefully, instruct her to pack her bags in 6 weeks' time, which feels like a lifetime to me, but the court wants us to be reasonable. Unfortunately, because we share a kid, my soon-to-be ex is going to be a part of my life for a while yet. I'd prefer if she just vanished. So my previous post, the one where I was asking when should I spill the beans to her family, was just me looking for some input and advice based on other people's experiences. Her family, who all live back in her home country, are going to flip their lids when they hear about this. Should I lay it all out for them next week when she gets served, or should I hold off like my attorney is suggesting? Of course, that question doesn't impact the divorce if it gets to court, but I think the best outcome I can get in the divorce is through negotiation. My dream outcome is that my wife simply return to her country and leave me and my daughter in peace. My lawyer says if I burn her bridges in her home country, she might have no reason to go back if her parents will put her in the firing squad. The court will never order her to leave the U.S. They will give her spousal support, child custody rights, hopefully at 50%, order me to pay for her apartment, etc. The best outcome for me is to negotiate the divorce, and my attorney says to keep things even. Don't come across now as mean. On the other hand, I want her family to know the truth, which won't come from her. A couple of folks have been asking me, are you certain she wasn't getting paid for all of this? Honestly, that thought hadn't even crossed my mind until now. I have no clue because she keeps her bank account under tight wraps. I haven't seen her with extra money, but I know she's pretty good at hiding things, probably at her job. In any case, it wouldn't really change much apart from maybe increasing the STD risk if you ask me. I brought it up with my lawyer, and he didn't think it would make much of a difference either. I live in a state where the reason for divorce doesn't matter, and accepting money from a guy isn't a crime in itself. If I could prove she was selling herself, though, it would be a big plus for me in getting full custody of our daughter. But as of now, I don't have any evidence pointing to that. And yeah, I'd like to understand why she did it too. We talked about loads of stuff before we got married, her ambitions, our life together, her dreams, and my support for her. I also made it crystal clear that if she ever cheated, I would pack my bags, or rather she'd have to. She remembers that talk, I'm sure. Maybe this is her dramatic way of asking for a divorce. If that's the case, she sure made her point, but it would have been way easier if she just told me she wanted out. Or maybe she tasted the sweet life of freedom here in the U.S. and went off the rails. Coupled with the struggle of adjusting to a new culture, being away from family, trying to fit in, and figuring out her emotional state, it seems like she just couldn't handle the pressure. I've spent a good chunk of my life overseas, so I get how culture shock feels. I was always there for her, helping her navigate the ups and downs of moving halfway across the globe. But all of that counts for nothing now, considering she's overstepped her boundaries at least 100 times, I'd say. I've tried to decipher the why behind all of this, but I'm not going to dig any further. For the first few days after the bomb dropped, I try to get her to explain her reasons, but hit a brick wall. She goes silent. If she can't be honest with herself, how can she be straight with me? Let's be clear. Our marriage is done and dusted. The divorce papers will be handed to her next week. Yeah, I get it. I'm not the first guy to be taken for a ride like this. I've read a lot about scams from her country. I've even seen some firsthand, so I know you gotta be on your toes all the time. The thing is we met face to face, not on the internet. I don't even have social media accounts. I thought our story was one of a kind, and we had a solid foundation. I travel for the thrill of it, and I've never been the type to take advantage of women. She shared a lot about her family. And a week after meeting her, I was like, let's do this. I want to see where you're from. This involved a 20-hour journey by ferry and bus, so it wasn't a small decision. What I'm trying to say is that I didn't see any signs of a scam in her. After we tied the knot, we lived in our country for 3 years while I commuted back and forth to the U.S. My radar was on, but I didn't have any suspicions, and I consciously decided moving to the U.S. was the best for our relationship. And then everything fell apart. Finally, I got a teleappointment with my doctor. No in-person visits due to the pandemic. I got tested for all possible STDs. It seems my wife at least made one good decision. She picked guys who were disease-free. All my tests came back negative, and there's no sign of COVID in me or our daughter, yet despite my wife's reckless behavior. And I got some sleep aids. For the past 3 nights, I've actually managed to sleep more than 3 hours. We're still in the early stages of the divorce, working on all the paperwork. There always seems to be something that adds a delay of a day or 3. We're waiting on a statement from a family friend to back up my capabilities as a dad. I'm pretty confident the divorce filing will make its way to the court next week, and then my wife will get the papers. My attorney suggested I pack a get-out-quick bag for me and my little girl. He's seen plenty of situations where the shock of getting served makes the other spouse flip out. My wife's got all next week off, so she'll be at home to receive the papers. I suppose that's one upside to her schedule change. If things go south, I'm prepared to make a quick exit with my daughter and head to a motel. I really have no idea how she's going to react, but so far, she hasn't shown any signs of facing the truth or understanding the repercussions of her actions. I'd be relieved if she just packed her bags and left. I'm asking the court to order her to be out by November 1st, but as my lawyer points out, it's the judge's call in the end. I've laid out my case. I've set up some counseling sessions through my doctor. I'm in serious need of someone to talk to. That's another downside of this pandemic. I haven't hung out with anyone in over half a year, and I don't have any close friends around. This has been hard on my daughter too, but she's so young that she doesn't understand what normal life is supposed to be. Just found out my wife's been messing around with other guys for the past year. I've had this hunch for a few months now. She's been telling strange little fibs. She's been all over her phone like a hawk. And even during our intimate moments, things have just felt weird, but I finally busted her. Her sister didn't log out of her Facebook Messenger. What I discovered in their chats completely floored me. Thank goodness there were no pictures, but the way she was chatting about these dudes, it made my skin crawl. It's not even just one guy. From the year's worth of messages with her sis, it looks like she's been sleeping with at least 3 or 4 guys. I've got a hunch it's more, though. One of them was a regular fling for 3 months while I was away, though she apparently doesn't talk to him anymore. Most recently, she hooked up with some guy at a hotel a couple weeks back. I reached out to a good buddy of mine, and he suggested I take some time to process my emotions before confronting her, but I'm not sure I can do that. When I look at her, I just feel this void. Her touch, her hugs, they only fuel this deep-seated anger and resentment. I am basically numb. She was my first serious love, and we've been together for 3 years, but I just don't think I can keep going. I feel caged in my own home. Before I logged out of her sister's account, I took a load of screenshots and stashed them somewhere she'd never think to look. Update. So like I said earlier, my wife has been playing around behind my back for the past year as far as I know. I was planning to keep it on the down low till October because she's an essential witness for a court case I'm involved in, but man, it was killing me on the inside. I had a chat with my dad about it, and he made a pretty solid point. She'd already given a sworn written statement about what went down, so I figured it was about time to face her. Only a week had passed since I discovered her infidelity when I decided to have that difficult conversation, but man, that was probably the most awkward week of my life. Every glance I gave her came with a rush of anger. Every grin I flashed her was just a facade. Hitting the sack with her left me cold and void, and the worst part, being intimate with her made me feel downright gross. I forced myself through it once or twice, and then started making up reasons to avoid being intimate. I was honestly falling apart inside. The morning of the day, I decided to confront her. She had the nerve to accuse me of cheating. I just stared at her and burst into a crazy laughing fit because the situation was just too ironic. It probably didn't help my case, but I stepped out of the house for a good 45 minutes to make some calls. That's when I rang up my dad and decided it was go time. After I chatted with my dad, I figured it was time to touch base with my wife's sister. See, back in October, she'd been trying to catch me about something big she wanted to spill about my wife. I just shrugged it off as some nonsense at the time because she's known for lying and stealing. But after all I'd seen, I thought maybe she was onto something real. So I reach out to her, and what does she do? She tips off my wife, so my wife gives me a ring, and I tell her I'm heading home to have that talk. I pulled into my driveway, stashed an audio recorder in my pocket, hit record on my phone's video, and tucked it into my shirt pocket. Then I walked inside to face her. On the outside, I was all chill, but inside, I was clueless about what would go down. This lady I'd been with for years had morphed into a total stranger over the past half a year. I hit her with, "How long have you been playing around behind my back? How many dudes? Why'd you do it?" At first, she tried to play the innocent card, but when I started tossing out quotes from her chats with her sister and naming the guys she'd been with, she got real emotional, real fast. I could see tears pooling in her eyes. I asked her again, and she clammed up until I spilled on how I found out. So I told her about her and her sister's messages. She immediately broke down, but I'm not buying half of what she dished out. She claimed it was only 2 guys, but the messages I saw point to at least 3 or 4. She also insisted she hadn't cheated since March, which I called BS on, because there was a message about a hotel meetup with a guy just days before my birthday. Her explanation for her actions was seriously the lamest thing I've ever heard. She said she was scared about moving far away from home and did it because she was weak. Her second excuse was that she hadn't been with anyone else sexually before me. I told her straight up those were the most ridiculous excuses I've ever heard. I let her know we were headed for divorce, and she just lost it, bawling her eyes out and pleading for me to stay, saying she couldn't stand to lose me. I didn't shed a tear, didn't raise my voice, didn't hurl any insults her way. I just stared at her crying, completely disgusted by the woman she turned into. I made it clear there was nothing she could do to change the situation. We were getting a divorce. I told her she could crash at my place for a month or 2 while she saved up some dough to move. That lasted about 10 days. Then I couldn't stand to look at her anymore, so I told her she had to leave. She ended up at a friend's place. Our split started off chill, but then she started pulling some stunts that really got under my skin. She'd ring my cell in the middle of the night when she knew I'd be asleep just to wake me up. She came up with this crazy tale where I'm the villain, saying that I only married her to get some extra cash and that my master plan all along was to dump her once she was of no use to me. One time, she even showed up at my doorstep at 1 a.m. to collect her stuff even though I'd been offering to drop her things off all darn day. After that episode, I went ahead and changed all the locks on my house. But what really ticked me off was when she demanded that I sign over one of my 2 cars to her in our separation agreement. I busted my hump to pay cash for both of those rides. She claimed she needed a car to get by, that she was entitled to one since I'd originally bought it for her, and that she deserved the car despite the fact I'd been footing the bill for everything over the past year. She even went as far as saying she wouldn't sign any paperwork unless I gave her the car. I was so ticked off that I let things simmer for a couple of weeks before I talked to anyone about it. When I did chat with a guy about it, he pointed out that giving up this $2,500 car would be a small price to pay considering the long-term benefits. I mean, she wasn't even interested in the pretty decent chunk of change that I've got tied up in my house. And she was even ready to give up all claims to alimony and any support after we split. The only reason I was hesitating on giving her the car, even though it would be the smarter move financially considering what she was ready to give up for it, was because I was just too darn angry. I was letting my anger get in the way. After considering his advice, I figured he was right. We've set a date in a few weeks to sign the separation papers. All she's getting from me is a car, and I get to keep everything else. Ever since we split, I'd been riding a roller coaster of emotions. I felt a lot of anger and experienced a whole lot of alone time. But the funny thing is I haven't found myself missing her, and I haven't reminisced about any good times in the month and a half or so that we've been separated. My place is a total disaster, and I just can't find the energy to tidy it up for more than a few minutes at a time. I've been spending a lot of my downtime just lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and walls. I said goodbye to all our cats and dogs, but despite all this, I'm feeling a sense of freedom I haven't felt in ages. I feel like I can do anything I want now. Her cheating was just the last straw, really. She turned into a real piece of work, always hurling insults at me, regularly coming home plastered, and even getting physical with me when she was wasted. She hadn't chipped in on any of our bills for almost a year and had become super reckless, breaking things, losing stuff, and racking up tickets that I ended up having to cover. So to be honest, this breakup is for the best. I really don't know what's next or what I'm going to do. Since I left her, I've hooked up with a few women I didn't even know before, just for the fun of it. One of them is really into me now, and she's a sweet and genuine girl, but I'm totally clueless about what to do about that. I've hit up clubs and bars for the first time, caught up with old pals, and I'm trying to get my life back in order. I can tell you right now that I'm not planning on getting hitched again for a really, really long time, if ever. I think I jumped into marriage too young, and this whole crazy year has aged me a lot. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a different world than my friends. I'm not even ready for a serious relationship right now. I've got an appointment to see a counselor or a therapist at the end of this month. I mean, not only am I dealing with a divorce, but there's a mountain of other stuff in my life too. I'm just not sure if I need it. Quick update, guys. I'm literally cracking up at all the folks mad at me for giving up my pets. Relax. I found good homes for all of them. I didn't just abandon them. I made a grown-up decision because I realized I wasn't able to take care of them anymore. After cutting ties with my wife, I just didn't have the drive, and having 4 big dogs and 2 cats was just too much for one person, especially with my work schedule. Adding to the mess, my wife said she'd take one of the dogs and both cats. But then out of the blue, she called to say she wasn't taking them anymore, so all of a sudden, all the pet care fell on me.